Anything Ghost, number 303. Since we both believe in the paranormal and how susceptible children are to it, we began to keep that in mind whenever Gilly would talk about or play with Emily. It soon got to the point that not a day would go by without Gilly mentioning Emily. Finally, one night, while we were driving, I asked Gilly jokingly, "All right, Gilly, I'm just going to throw it out there. Is Emily a ghost?" Welcome to Anything Ghost. My name is Lex Wahl. Anything Ghost is a podcast where people share their personal experiences with ghosts. If you have a story to share, send it to lex@anythingghost.com. In this episode, we're going to share some stories from London and the US, as well as a story from the Anything Ghost archive, one that I've always loved. So stick around for show number 303. And this is a story from Peter in London, England, the Greenwich District Hospital. And before I get started, I'll let you know that a theater in a UK hospital refers to a room where surgery takes place. And from what I understand, it's called that because students and family used to be able to watch the operations. I've just discovered your podcast, and I'm enjoying the stories very much. I'm a Brit from London. I love a good spooky story as much as the next person. But in all my years, only one truly weird thing has happened to me. This is going to take a while, so put another log on the fire and top up your glass. 30-odd years ago, I worked in the operating theater complex of a large London general hospital, the now demolished Greenwich District Hospital. It wasn't an old hospital, and there were no stories about ghosts as far as I knew. But one place was different. The operating complex was big and busy. 6 theaters, most of which had morning and afternoon lists. Theaters 1 and 2 were for general surgery. 3 was for gynecological operations. 4 was for eyes. And 5 and 6 were orthopedic theaters. There were up to 60 operations per day. Anyone who worked there for long enough had a story about something strange happening, mostly things moving in the ways they shouldn't. These things usually happened at night or at other quiet times, although there was a funny thing that happened during the day one time. In a busy theater between ops, the medical staff were preparing for the next patient, and the cleaning staff were doing their thing. Suddenly, a young student nurse screamed. All heads turned toward her, then looked in the direction she was staring. The cotton strip that tied a cleaner's dress at the back of the bow was being slowly pulled. The cleaner thought it was something larking around until the scream. About 8 people saw that. These kinds of things happened, or perhaps, should I say, were noticed, about once a year. I was part of the ancillary staff, and my job was to supply the theaters with the instruments from the large storeroom, sterilize the instruments, and to help out in the theaters when required. The shifts were 8 a.m. to 4 p.m., 2 p.m. to 10 p.m., and the night shift, 10 p.m. to 6 a.m., which I had to do 1 week in 7. I had been working there about 3 years, when one night I was working around the back in the store area. At the back of each theater were 2 sets of 4 doors. Sterile instruments were put into the cupboards with the 4 doors, and dirty material was collected from the other cupboards. All the doors were closed. I went around the front of the theaters for a couple of minutes, and when I returned, every door was wide open. 48 doors, all open to their fullest. I went straight back and asked the nurses if they'd been in the store, which I knew they hadn't. There was no explanation. But that's not my main story. I didn't witness those doors being opened, so that doesn't count. How's your glass? I was on nights one week, starting at 2200 hours, and I was having a game of pool and a beer in the hospital club before work. Just 1 week beer, mind. The phone behind the bar rang, and it was for me. My colleague on the 2 to 10 shift warned me that the place was like a MASH unit. Cold surgery had run on, and there were several emergency operations coming in. He'd been so busy that he was unable to clear the backlog of instruments to be sterilized. So I was in for a very busy night. I agreed to go in early, and I left the club at 9:30. I was indeed extremely busy when I got there. It took me a few hours to sterilize the backlog, and all the time dashing back and forth into the theaters to help lift and position patients and keeping the surgical team supplied with what they needed. By about 0100, things quieted down. But I still needed to fill the hatches with the instruments for the next day's surgery. 6 theaters with full lists. The main store was about 20 yards long and 6 wide. Along 3 walls, there were shelves floor to ceiling, full of instruments, either on metal trays in double-wrapped linen, or in smaller packs of instruments for particular operations. For example, for a hysterectomy, you'd need a general set 2, plus a hysterectomy set, plus drains, sutures, swabs, and all the rest of it. Each surgeon had their particular favorite devices like forceps or scalpel handles of various types. It was about 1:30, and I was steadily working on my way through the lists. I heard a thump, like something had bumped into the wall. I looked up. Suddenly, a pack of instruments came off a high shelf and landed on the floor 2 yards from me. The higher shelves were recessed and not as deep as the lower ones, containing the biggest general sets, so if anything had toppled off a higher shelf, it would have simply landed on a lower, deeper shelf. In any case, the pack, a gallbladder pack weighing about 3 or 4 kilos, hadn't toppled off. It had flown off, and I had seen it with my own eyes. I heard myself say, "Do that again." Funny now, I didn't feel afraid at all. This was my place. I'd been there for years. Busy though I was, I sat down and had a word with myself. I told myself to fix this incident in my memory, as memory fades with time. I also put the pack back on the shelf and tried to coax it off. But as I said before, it just couldn't have happened that way. I didn't tell anyone about what happened for many years. Being young, I was afraid of what people might say, and I didn't want to be ridiculed. I didn't even tell the theater staff, and I'm not sure why. Now I have much more life behind me than in front of me, and I don't care what anyone thinks. It's not the Amityville horror, quite mundane in fact, but it happened, heavy packs of stainless steel instruments should not, according to the laws of physics, fly off shelves. That's my story. Hope you liked it. Good luck, Peter. And that was Peter's experiences at those were Peter's experiences at the Greenwich District Hospital in London, which is no longer there. The Greenwich District Hospital was built in the mid-1960s, and it replaced a hospital that was built in 1874 on the same spot, St. Alphege Hospital. So I wouldn't be surprised if there were some long-lost spirits roaming around that area. And the next story we have, it's from Greta in Pennsylvania. Oni masks. I've posted this story to a few paranormal threads online, but it is my personal true story and was originally posted by me. We lived in a house in Poconos, Pennsylvania. It had been previously owned by an old man. One day when I was around 5 or 6, I was sitting on my floor playing with my toy horses. I looked up and saw 3 masks floating in a triangle formation right in the middle of the room. I remember thinking they looked like Halloween monsters, a witch with a crooked nose, a red devil with pointed teeth, a hairy werewolf monster. They looked murderously angry. After that, I set up my toys in the closet so I could face the corner and not look out into the room while I played. My family and I would see orbs. By that I mean multiple family members would see the same green, glowing ball float through the living room at the same time. Eventually we moved out, and before we did, my dad cleaned out the basement and found a box of the old man, previous owner's stuff. It included antique bowls and chopsticks, knickknacks, and an album of black and white photos of a soldier standing in front of the red torii temples and posed with geishas. The old man had been a U.S. soldier during the World War II occupation of Japan. Years later, when I was 16, I went into a tattoo parlor. And while there, I realized what I had seen floating from my childhood bedroom were Oni masks. And I didn't know what Oni masks were, but I looked it up, and this one's from JapaneseOnimasks.com. And it says, Oni masks are considered to be some of the most powerful and feared masks in the world. These masks depict the angry, red-faced demons of Japanese folklore and are said to subdue and scare away evil spirits. They can also be worn as a protective talisman during festivals. So now you know, and so do I. Anything Ghost has been around since 2006. To get the complete Anything Ghost library, go to anythingghost.com. Join VIP. There's a one-time membership fee, and you'll get complete access to the Anything Ghost archive. Anythingghost.com. Join VIP. And the next story we have is from Alana in the U.S. Doggy Energy. Hi, Lex and listeners. I sent in a story a decade ago about our beloved boxer dog, Joe. Since we have sadly lost a couple of more of our beloved dogs, 2019 was an exceptionally hard year for us, as we lost both our pit Ozzy and our bulldog Jack. As some of you listeners can understand, I didn't think I would make it through losing them. They are everything to us. My husband and I both believe that we are all energy, and that energy lives on, and that our energy and their energy are now forever bonded. However, I look for signs and talk to them all the time. It is really hard for me to let go. My husband doesn't really get into the paranormal parts of it like I do, I guess. It's been a very hard adjustment without them for us both, and I hope this story of what happened, which helped me, might help someone else too. Last night my husband woke me and said he was in the kitchen. We have night lights throughout the house, so it's fairly lit up, and that he saw our pit, Ozzy, sort of like a shadow, but very clearly walking from the man cave into the den. He said he could even see the nose and felt the strongest presence of Oz. It was so strong and clear that he was emotional. As he was telling me what happened, I just knew Ozzy was there, and that possibly Jack and Joe weren't far behind. Then, this morning, my husband texted me saying, "You will think I'm crazy, but I just heard Jack bark." He had a very distinct bark. He said that our two younger dogs, who sound very different and are very small compared to what Ozzy and Jack were outside, and this bark came from inside. He said he was positive it was Jack's bark. You have to understand where I question myself sometimes because of how badly I want and need to see them. I don't second guess my husband in this situation. If anything, it helps bring confirmation and peace that maybe they are closer to us than we think sometimes they are after they pass on. And now we have a story from the Anything Ghost Archive. This was from August of 2012, episode 160. Here's a story from Alex in Utica, New York. Is Emily a ghost? I currently live with my fiancée and her 5-year-old daughter, Gilly. I have lived with them for the past 3 to 4 years. Prior to our current home, we lived in an apartment in another area close to where we live now. We never really thought much of the apartment. It seemed fairly modern to us, and we never had any uneasy feelings while living there. However, after the first year, my fiancé's daughter, who was about 3 or 4 at that time, began talking to an imaginary friend named Emily. Since we both believe in the paranormal and how susceptible children are to it, we began to keep that in mind whenever Gilly would talk about or play with Emily. It soon got to the point that not a day would go by without Gilly mentioning Emily. Finally, one night, while we were driving, I asked Gilly jokingly, "All right, Gilly, I'm just going to throw it out there. Is Emily a ghost?" She laughed and said, "No, she's my friend." Immediately after her response, a cow appeared in the middle of the road, causing me to violently jerk the wheel into the oncoming lane. Now this may have been a coincidence, and we ended up chalking it up to that, until we began to notice other strange things happen at the apartment. One night while we were asleep, I awoke to an icy cold press on the tip of my nose. I reached for my fiancée to see if she was playing a trick on me, but she was fast asleep. I even checked her hands to see if she may have accidentally touched me while moving, but her hands were warm. Another night, I was watching TV in the living room when my fiancée nervously called me into the bedroom. I walked in and saw the TV on, but nothing out of the ordinary. She said she was sleeping, when all of a sudden the TV turned on by itself. This began to happen quite often after that. One time, while I was sitting in the living room, out of the corner of my eye, I saw who I thought was my fiancé walk into the bedroom, turn on the light, and begin to put away laundry. Or so I thought. After a while, I called to her and asked if she needed any help, since it seemed like it was taking longer than usual. She asked what I was talking about. However, her voice was not coming from the bedroom. My fiancé was in the kitchen and said she had been in there the entire time. Perhaps the most interesting incident happened late one night when I heard Gilly making a strange noise in her bedroom. I rushed into the room and found her crying, gasping for air, with a very unusual cough. She was crying and saying her chest was hurting. It turned out to be croup cough, which I had never heard of before that incident. That being said, I ran into my bedroom to wake up my fiancée and tell her that I needed help. After we calmed Gilly down and put her back to bed, she told me that right before I burst into the door, she saw a little girl in a white dress with blonde hair open the door with a look of surprise and worry on her face. To this day, we both believe that it was Emily trying to warn her friend that she was in trouble. After these incidents began occurring, I did a little research on the building. Though our apartment seemed to be very modern, the home itself had been built in the late 1800s. Unfortunately, this was the extent of my findings. However, the history itself explains a lot. One last, quick story about Gilly. This doesn't involve her ghostly counterpart. However, it is still quite interesting. Last summer, when she was about 4 or 5, we were staying at a hotel on vacation. We had just tucked her into bed, read her stories, and said good night. She replied, "Okay, I'm going to die now." Shocked, we both looked at her and told her that was not a nice thing to say, and she should not repeat it. In a nonchalant tone, she replied, "Oh, I was just joking. Besides, I would just go up to heaven anyway." Mind you, we are not a religious family, and up until that point, we had not really discussed such things with her. Nevertheless, her comment was both intriguing and freaky at the same time. We asked her how she knew this, and she continued, "Well, that's what happened last time. Gerald came down and took the stone off my head, and then we both flew up to heaven." We began to ask about Gerald, and she answered, "Oh, he's the one that helped me go to heaven. He's got wings. I stayed up there for a while, then I decided to come back down here and live with you guys." After composing ourselves, we again said good night, and all went to sleep. On the way home, we drove past a cemetery, and Gilly said excitedly, "That's one of the stones," pointing to a tombstone. "That's the kind of stone he helped get off my head." She also would talk about her old family and how she had children who did not want her, and so they kicked her out. She also stated that she had to bury one of them, as well as her mother. Though the frequency of her comments about her past lives have diminished, she still occasionally will mention them. Okay, and so that was up from episode number 160, like I said. And it's in my book of Anything Ghost Stories, Volume 1. And you can find it on Amazon. Or go to anythingghost.com. There's some links there. And while I was looking for Alex's story, I found another story that's pretty good from episode number 160. This one's from Lori in Mexico. Ghost at Grandma's House. I don't remember what I called it back then, but I just titled it that this time. I was visiting my grandma's house in Irapuato, Mexico, with my mother. I was about 10 years old. I can still remember it like it was yesterday. When entering the home on the left-hand side, it was the living room. Walking north, you would walk outside, and that was the middle of the home. That led you out into the open. The only roof there were the trees' leaves. There were 2 huge master bedrooms downstairs. To the left, there were stairs that led you to the 2nd and 3rd floors. I had been sleeping on the 2nd floor. I remember arriving at my grandma's hometown, Irapuato, Mexico. It looked amazing. Huge mountains. Everything looked ancient and Victorian. I was amazed at how huge the house was. Everything was awesome. The first night I slept like a baby, but that changed on the 2nd night. I was lying down in my bed. My mother was in the same room, but on the opposite side of her own bed. It was about 2 a.m., and I couldn't sleep. I was just staring at the door, because I felt like someone was going to peek out of it. I was a little scared, but not enough to get goosebumps. Suddenly, I heard someone open the front door. In Mexico's, the doors are made out of steel, so when someone unlocks the doors, you're able to hear it loud and clear. I heard the doors unlock, but didn't think anything of it. I figured it was my uncle coming home late from work. But I was wrong. I heard the first door open and close with the locks being locked. And then the 2nd door that leads to the middle of the home slammed. I heard someone run up the stairs. At that point, I was expecting my uncle to turn on the light. But he did not. Whoever was slamming the doors and coming upstairs did not enter the 2nd home on the 2nd floor, but walked further to the other home on the 3rd floor. I was surprised no one heard it. I eventually fell asleep. While having breakfast, I told my grandpa that I heard someone walking to the 3rd floor. But my grandpa said the 3rd home was only used for storage. But he added that he has also heard footsteps coming up from the 3rd floor. He told me he just ignores it. My other uncle said that when he would sleep on the 3rd floor, he felt someone sit down next to him while he was sleeping. On my 2nd to the last day in Mexico, I decided to investigate the 3rd floor with my cousin Israel. We both went up there, scared as hell, but I was not going to back down. We opened the door, and all we saw were lots of boxes, couches, and beds that were not set up. We decided to cancel the investigation due to all the boxes. That night was New Year's, and I was getting ready on the 2nd floor to watch the 3 dolls they burn every New Year's with a ton of fireworks. While getting ready, I was alone. The lights were off. I was soon in panic mode. I heard the door creak to the bathroom. I ran to the window to get light and to call my mom to keep me company. When I was about to open the window, I heard something slam the door to the bathroom and locked the door from the inside. I was shaking. My mom finally came upstairs, and I told her what had happened. But of course, she didn't believe me. And we get a lot of stories like that on Anything Ghost. And I love them. They're pretty creepy. I'm hearing a front door open, footsteps going up the stairs, maybe opening another door, and then nothing happening. But it's pretty much known as a residual haunting, which means that the ghost repeats a loop of its past. And there's usually no intelligence involved. You can't contact them. It's just going to happen. But creepy nonetheless.
Hi, my name's Rob from Wiltshire in England. A few years ago, I had a dream that I was standing outside my granddad's house, and I'm looking up at the top window, and I see this light, like a solid light, going backwards and forwards. The next part of the dream, I'm standing outside the bedroom, the same room, and I can see this light again going backwards and forwards through the window. But there's a man standing behind the door, a very tall man, a dark sort of figure, and that was really the end of that dream. I didn't think much of it, to be honest, till the next day. I spoke to my mum about it, and she said that a few hours ago that my sister told me a dream, and it was exactly the same as the one I've just told my mum. So yeah, it was a bit spooky, and I just thought I'd let you guys know. Okay, cheers.
And as you know, I usually don't share dreams on Anything Ghost because they're not really ghost stories, but that one was bizarre. Rob having a dream and then telling his mom and finding out his sister had the exact same dream. And that'll do it for Anything Ghost number 303. If you have a story you want to share, send it to Lex at anythingghost.com or go to the website, anythingghost.com, and there's a form you can fill out there. You can either record it yourself or send me the text and I'll record it. Okay, everybody, I'll talk to you in show number 304. Until then, take care.